and welcome to the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners. We're having a transportation workshop this afternoon. I guess we're going to find out about the money we don't have, but with that, I will turn it over to our County Administrator, Bonnie Wise.
Very good, thank you. And if somebody could give a quick call to Commissioner White, he's still having some technical difficulties over there. So thank you.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, would I be able to do a roll call before we get started?
Sure, of course.
Thank you. Kemp?
Here.
Cohen?
Here.
Hagan?
Here.
Myers?
Here.
Overman?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
White? Thank you.
And I know Commissioner White is having some technical difficulties and is trying to join us for the record. And just to let everyone know, this is a totally virtual meeting today. We don't have a hybrid meeting in person. It's totally virtual. And with that, I'll turn it back to the County Administrator, Bonnie Wise.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, completely virtual, so no board action. We can, of course, have discussion, but no formal action at this time. So I'm going to open up the workshop. This is probably going to be one of the first many workshops that you'll have over the next several months. But this was one that we wanted to be sure to discuss with you. We have various transportation projects upcoming and some issues that we're being faced with that we wanted to go forward and discuss with you. I want to start with a little bit of a background, if I could, and to take you down a little bit of memory lane if for the record, and especially for the commissioners who weren't here at the time. So in September of 2016, the board had adopted a 10-year transportation policy to fund needed transportation improvements in the county. And the policy identified annual funding targets each year that would eventually provide $600 million in total funding by the end of the policy period. In March of 2017, the board adopted an $812 million transportation plan with a list of planned projects to be included in the county's capital improvement program. And this transportation plan was to be funded with the $600 million 10-year transportation policy with enhanced revenue assumptions. The $812 million plan also called for the acceleration of projects into the early years of the 10-year period. And this acceleration was to be accomplished through the use of the county's commercial paper program, which would provide for short-term funding with repayment in the later years of the 10-year period as revenue targets increased. During the fiscal year 20 budget process, the county was unable to meet the targeted revenues included in the policy due to the identification of other critical needs in the unincorporated area general fund, including over 40 new fire rescue positions and approximately 60 new law enforcement positions. The 10-year transportation policy was waived by the board for fiscal year 20. In fiscal year 21 budget process, that yielded similar results for the fiscal year 20 budget as the fiscal year 20 budget process. We continued identification of critical needs affecting the unincorporated area general fund, and revenue impacts from COVID-19 pandemic again precluded the achievement of funding targets for transportation. The fiscal year 21 budget added 66 new fire rescue positions necessary to staff 2 new fire stations, as well as body cameras for the sheriff's office and certain other needs. At that time, the board reiterated its commitment to neighborhood repaving and other safety priorities. The 10-year transportation policy was again waived by the board for fiscal year 21 with the adoption of the budget. The bottom line is that we're sitting here today, still without a Supreme Court decision regarding the transportation surtax. The population growth in the unincorporated areas placing extreme pressure on the ability of the county's unincorporated area general fund to meet the continuing needs of citizens. Transportation is not the only critical need funded by this fund. Approximately 74% of the unincorporated area general fund budget is devoted to law enforcement and fire protection, and needs in both these areas are greater than current funding can support. In the presentation today, you will hear that approximately $287 million in CIP transportation projects do not have an identified funding source due to revenue shortfalls over the past 2 years, projected revenue shortfalls over the next 5 years, and due to the funding of other service needs in the unincorporated area general fund. You will also hear today that the fiscal year 21 adopted budget includes a planned $190 million bond issue to fund certain projects at a point of no return, which require funding. At the time the 10-year transportation policy was adopted, this long-term bond issue was not considered as a funding source for the policy. All projects are to be funded by revenue sources generated within the 10-year term of the policy. The bond issue is funded by approximately $10 million in recurring half-cent sales tax revenue. Half-cent sales tax revenue makes up a significant portion of the revenues that fund the unincorporated area general fund. Therefore, the issuance of further bonds to fund the $287 million in projects without an identified funding source would further stress an already stressed unincorporated area general fund. While the county's unincorporated area general fund is under stress to fund growing critical needs such as law enforcement, fire protection, and transportation, it is currently structurally balanced with strong reserves. Additionally, the county continues to maintain a AAA general credit rating from all 3 major credit rating agencies. The primary challenge is one of meeting growing needs and funding certain current service deficits. In order to meet current challenges, we are planning to embark on a strategic planning process with the board this year, and we will also engage the board throughout the fiscal year 22 budget process and other targeted workshops addressing most critical areas of need, including transportation. Hillsborough County is not unlike many other local governments and the challenges we face. However, while many difficult decisions lie ahead, we are well positioned financially, and we have several options at our disposal to serve the needs of our residents. So although complicated and somewhat challenging, we are at least on sound fiscal footing in order to address these challenges, and therefore wanted to bring them to your attention. We've been talking about them for quite some time, but it is very important to be transparent and open and honest about our fiscal situation. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Kevin Brickey, who will go through part of the presentation that you have before you, and then to John Lyons, and then to the board for discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Wise, and good afternoon, Commissioners. Kevin Brickey, Management Budget. So today on the next slide, our agenda is to talk to you today about the transportation CIP and the challenges that we're faced with, including the status of the $812 million 10-year transportation plan that Ms. Wise just spoke about, the overall transportation CIP, what the size of it is, and what revenues and other sources we're using to fund it. We're looking at the projects and types of projects in the adopted transportation CIP. John Lyons will talk about the selection criteria for bond funding, what sorts of projects would flow from that in those projects recommended for bond funding. And then those projects that remain that are associated with the short-term financing for which we do not have an identified permanent funding source, so they are essentially unfunded. And then we'll have some board discussion. The 812 plan that Ms. Wise just ably described, that was adopted in 2016, was originally $600 million, and it was a revenue-based program which was relying on the growth of existing revenues, particularly for property tax from the unincorporated area fund to be transferred to transportation. It also relied on CIT sales taxes. And then when the board approved the overall plan in 2017, it was an 812 plan. $812 million of projects. And the growth, the characteristics of the growth for that revenue was that the revenue would mainly materialize in the later years. It would grow to those higher levels. But there was a desire to accelerate those projects into the earlier years, and that was accomplished by budgeting those projects with commercial paper or short-term financing, with the intention that future payoff from revenue growth would pay the commercial paper off. From a combination of revenue growth not keeping up with those hopes, and that decisions were made that there were other priorities to fund, particularly in public safety and parks in the unincorporated area fund. The board did suspend that policy in FY20. And then with the COVID coming along, we had further revenue difficulties, and the policy was suspended in FY21. So that in this graph or this table, you see that the policy envisioned $300 million of funding going to transportation between FY17 and FY21, and actually 189 million has moved to there. And so we have a funding deficit of $110 million. We don't anticipate that any further unincorporated area ad valorem can be transferred in the future to this plan. And so we project that that deficit will grow to a total of $423 million. This slide and the next slide, and we can move to the next slide, were presented during the budget process, and we discussed these during the summer in the budget process. So this is really a reiteration of these slides. And in the summer, we presented the recommended budget with $190 million bond issuance to meet some of this challenge, in that the 423 has no identifiable source to repay that level of issued commercial paper. And the board did indeed include that bond issuance in the adopted budget for FY21. So there still was a remaining projected deficit of $233 million. And indeed, that is funded for annual debt service from the half-cent sales tax at $10 million. Next slide, please. This slide is showing the use of commercial paper, short-term financing, in the budgeting of transportation projects and the inclusion of transportation projects in the future years of the CIP. Prior to the 10-year transportation policy being adopted, we did not budget projects with CP, with short-term financing. But since then, in order to accelerate the projects, we did, and that has grown in FY21 to $232 million. And the CIP currently would anticipate that to grow even further. But once again, the revenue that was hoped to be appearing for use for transportation in those later years, FY24, 25, and 26, is not there. It has been essentially committed to the other needs of the unincorporated area fund. And so this future issuance of CP commercial paper is not sustainable. Now the entire transportation CIP on the next slide. Next slide, please.
It's moving slow.
Okay. There we are. The entire transportation CIP FY21 to 26 is about $831 million. That is mostly projects from the 812 plan. There have been other projects included in the transportation CIP that are not in that 812 plan. And then in the multicolored bar on the right, that shows how projects are currently included in the budget and in the CIP by funding sources. There are a number of funding sources. At the bottom is $33 million of CIT sales tax. That revenue, the CIT, will expire near the end of calendar year 2026 and is pretty much programmed through that time. So there's not an opportunity to add more CIT, and the impacts of COVID on our sales taxes has accentuated the fact that it is programmed out, CIT. You see $75 million in fuel taxes, gas taxes. That's a large funding source for the transportation program, indeed. But it is very good to remember it's a slow growth revenue. Fuel efficiency is increasing. Electric cars are increasing. And so even without the effects of COVID, which has detrimentally affected our fuel taxes, but even if without the effects of COVID, that source of revenue is likely to be a very slow growth revenue. General revenues are currently about $24 million for transportation CIP. Again, we don't expect to be able to dedicate further unincorporated area general revenues ad valorem to transportation as we fund the public safety and other service needs in the unincorporated area fund. There's about $119 million of mobility fees in the CIP, certainly a large portion. But it's good to remember there that mobility fees are a restricted revenue. They're restricted to use for projects that expand capacity of the system, and they're also restricted by geographic area to be used in the general area where they were collected. In the darker gray box, that's $190 million. That's the bond issuance that's included in the adopted FY21 budget. It is not issued as yet. And that is the bond issue that I talked about a little bit earlier that was meeting part of the challenge of that $400 million gap. Above that, in the pink or salmon colored area, is a $287 million block that Ms. Wise alluded to. That is what is in the transportation CIP, much of it in future years, that is identified as short-term financing, commercial paper. And again, we do not have a source to sustain the issuance of that commercial paper and to repay it. So it essentially, as we go to the next slide, is an unfunded amount or a to be determined amount, that $287.1 million. As we move forward, I'll turn it over to John to talk a little bit more about the bond issue, projects related to the bond issue, and other information that's pertinent. John?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. This is John Lyons, Public Works. So this slide represents kind of a combination of the previous couple of slides and where we've broken the sources and uses down into the three categories of maintenance. And maintenance includes the resurfacing program, sidewalk repairs, bridge maintenance and replacement. The safety program includes things such as new sidewalks, intersection improvements, trails, any enhancements, school zone safety projects, safe routes to schools, and a variety of projects like that. The corridor improvements could include some complete street projects, such as 131st Street, some new roads like Citrus Park Drive, the bridge over Apollo Beach Boulevard, and Bell Shoals Road as well. So I'll go across each line horizontally at this point. So the maintenance needs identified in the CIP for the next through 25 are for $204 million. The revenues that we are using now includes a variety of sources, some CIT, some gas tax, mainly gas tax, some grant projects and things like that. And so we're not including any bond recommendations because typically the bond issuance period has to kind of match up with the life of the asset. So for example, a 30-year bond issuance versus a 20-year life of asphalt resurfacing type program. And so what that does is it leaves about a $92 million unidentified gap in the program over the next few years. Right now we're expending on average, this year's a little, FY21 is a little bit kind of unusual because we've got some projects like the Maydell Bridge program or the replacement going on right now that kind of affects what the budget looks like. But on an annual need basis, we typically are programming about $25 million towards resurfacing, about $3 million to sidewalk repairs, and about $4 million annually for bridge repair and replacement. And so that amounts to about $32 million a year in needs in that area. Under the safety program, our needs are about $161 million. The revenues are about $86 million, which is a combination of mobility fees, impact fees, some grant money, and other sources such as that. And then that's relying upon about $67 million of bond issuance. There's several intersection projects that are completed in design and land acquisition and are ready to go to bid now for construction. There's about $7 million of projects that are, or $7 million worth of funding that's not identified at this point in time. The corridor improvements, again, it's projects like Citrus Park Drive, Bell Shoals, the Apollo Beach Boulevard overpass, some more of the more expensive intersection projects such as that. The current revenue projection is $155 million for those projects. There's $122 million of bond portion in this category, and about $188 million worth of future projects that are yet to be identified. So those projects, we'll get into the kind of the bond issuance a little bit more in the next slide. So just kind of summarizing that, you know, we have inadequate revenues, a lack of recurring funds for maintenance, and other funds that have use restrictions, such as grants are specific to projects typically. The mobility fees, again, are geographically limited to the type of project that can't be used for maintenance. And so we have that. And of course, the surtax is still uncertainty as to what the outcome of that is going to be. So the funding criteria, the selection criteria for bond funding would be projects that are under construction. The design is near completion and getting ready to go to construction. It includes categories of safety, which includes some of the trail gaps that would be close to construction. Bike and pedestrian facilities, typically around schools is one category, filling in sidewalk gaps, and some of the smaller trail projects that are kind of moving ahead, and numerous intersection improvement projects as well, which could be adding turn lanes, reconfiguring geometry in an intersection because of crashes, things such as that. Also, we took into consideration that we have existing agreements through FDOT funding agreements, awarded grants, and school zone is a priority because that there's some legislative change that requires us to complete some work around school zones that has to be done by 2023. Another big criteria is that the funds on the bond issuance need to be spent within a 3-year requirement within the period of the bond once it's issued. And so we wanted to target those projects that are, you know, in the works, on the cusp of beginning, to be able to meet that 3-year spend requirement. So of the $190 million outlined for the recommended projects, and we've provided some supplemental information that has a great deal of detail of specific projects in each of these categories, with the locations and some maps as well that identify those. So the pedestrian, so $11 million to the ped safety and mobility enhancements. The emergency beacon signal retrofits is about $3 million, and those are to provide for flashing beacons in the case of long-term power outages such as a hurricane. School zone upgrades to enhance the safety around school zones. That's additional beacons, markings, signage, and those type of things. We've got about $6 million of bridge replacements, which I believe amounts to 6 identified locations on that. Numerous intersection improvements that are listed in there as well, and the corridor improvements associated with congestion relief. I wanted to emphasize that of the $139 million that are in this category, there's about $82 million that would go to the Big Bend Road project specifically. We've been working closely with FDOT over the last couple of years. That project was identified as a top priority in the county by the board. And so we've been working with them, and we're near completion of a local funding agreement with DOT. They're moving ahead with that project. They're going to complete the construction under a design build contract. And we look to finish that project sometime in 2024 at this point in time. It'll require us to execute a local funding agreement and also to provide funding for the project. The financing of this project is a little bit complex. The total value is about $97 million. Of that, about $14 million is utility funded relocations. The remaining $83 million is made up of about $23.5 million of DOT money, some of which we get upfront, some of it which they'll pay us back over a period of time. And not included in at this point is we were awarded the build grant from the Federal Highway Administration last September for $25 million for this project. And we're in the process of working with both FDOT and the Federal Highway Administration to bring that agreement to the board. Hopefully this sometime before summer to kind of spell that out, and that'll help subsidize that project as well. So there's about $48 million of external funding in it. That'll help offset some of our expenses on that project as well over a period of time. I'll turn it back over to Kevin.
Thank you, John. So after the $190 million bond issuance, there still is the $287 million of project costs that do not have an identifiable funding source. Here are some potential options regarding that gap that could help with that challenge. First of all, we have a countywide gas tax. That would be the second local option fuel tax. It can be levied from 1 cent to 5 cents. At 5 cents, that fuel tax would garner about $26 million. It would be shared with the cities. The BOCC share would be about $17.8 million annually. The ad valorem property tax, of course, that's general revenue. 1 mil in the unincorporated area is worth $68 million annually currently. Next is the community investment tax. Again, that tax is currently levied. It expires November 30th, 2026. It is currently programmed out through that time and has little capacity to shoulder anything at the moment, but it is on here, and that tax, the option is to extend that half-cent local option sales tax beyond that point. The local option transportation surtax has been mentioned a few times during this presentation. As John and Ms. Wise mentioned, of course, we're awaiting the Supreme Court decision on that. That could go back to a referendum for the 1% local option sales tax. Under the current formulas of sharing, the BOCC share is about $88 million annually. There is the public service tax, sometimes called the utility tax. That tax is charged by the 3 cities within their geographic areas. County can levy that tax in the unincorporated area. We currently do not. It is a tax on utility services, particularly electricity, up to 10%. Natural gas and water can be on there as well. Orange County, a similar sized county, does indeed levy the utility tax. And currently, Orange County garners about $76 million annually. Another possibility is budget reprioritization. That could mean the redirection of funds from other service areas outside of transportation to transportation. It could mean a reprioritization within the transportation CIP program, where some projects are deferred to a later time, or perhaps removed. To meet the challenge, it could be a variety of these, some of one and some of another. And as John mentioned, there's also grant opportunities that his group also pursues. So these are some potential sources and options to meet the challenge. And with that, I think John and I have concluded our presentation.
I lost my cursor there, so I couldn't get my my mic going. Thank you. That was that was very brief presentation and very concise, and I think just in terms of funding for the future, and leaves us a lot of time for board discussion, which doesn't happen often. So I don't know if anybody wants to. Oops, let me get my
Commissioner
Yes.
Kemp, this is Commissioner White. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I don't have any comments at this time. I just wanted to let you know I'm here. I'm having some technical difficulties on my computer, but I've been on via phone since about 1:35.
Okay, we did announce that you were having technical difficulties, and we didn't even start till like 1:34 practically. So you didn't probably miss
Okay,
much.
well, I just wanted the record to reflect that I'm here at the meeting.
Great, thank you. And I have the I don't see any comments at this time. Okay, Commissioner Hagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess this is a question, maybe 2 questions. If I understand it right, maintenance is defined by resurfacing and sidewalks, and we're unable to bond that part of the program. Is that accurate?
So all I can say is that the average life of the resurfacing is about 20 years. I think under the characterization of the bond, and I think Kevin could probably handle this with regard to bond life versus asset life.
Yes, but generally speaking, when you have a bond issue as a whole, the bond issue as a whole, the life of the bonded project and bonded revenue need to be commensurate with each other. This is looking at a 30-year bond. There's possibilities that there's some leeway can be had, but as a whole, it needs to match the length of the bond issuance, the life of the asset.
Okay, and then the second question, if I understood it correctly, trails are considered safety projects. Safety projects can be bonded. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, well then, help me understand, if trails are considered safety projects, why are sidewalks not considered safety projects?
So new sidewalks would be considered a safety project. What we've categorized is there are new sidewalks within the safety program.
Okay, so what percentage of the unfunded sidewalk need is included in the safety component of the bond issue?
Give me 1 second. I can give you a rough estimate of that.
And while John's doing that, if I could just step in, and Commissioner Hagan, just to continue on with what Kevin was saying, you know, what you want to do is you want to match your bond issue to the average life of your project. That's if you're doing a 30-year project, right? But if you have something that has an average life of 20 years, you could also have a shorter bond issue, which is more commensurate with the average life of the asset.
Well, I've made it no secret as far as resurfacing and sidewalks are an extreme priority for me. We get requests daily for resurfacing and sidewalks, and I would certainly be supportive of however we can creatively finance both of those, whether it's in this bond issue is being considered or another source.
Commissioner, in response to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Kind of in
Mr.
response
Lyons.
to the question about the sidewalk. So there's probably nearly $100 million worth of new sidewalk needs that have been identified. A couple summers ago, when we did the 10-year surtax plan, we looked at, filling in all the gaps, in particular within a 2-mile radius of the schools. And that essentially means that almost every street in the county within the urban service boundary would have a sidewalk constructed. So there's going to be some challenges with that. In some areas, there's could be environmental or right-of-way type issues, but $100 million for new sidewalks is probably not a bad answer. When it comes to sidewalk repairs, we spend about $3 million a year now on sidewalk repairs. As part of the enhancement with the surtax, we wanted to increase that by about $4 million to $7 million a year. So that kind of gives an order of magnitude that, like many things, we're far behind on where we need to be.
I mean, can that number be adjusted if that was the board's pleasure? I mean, I know I've got some sidewalk requests that have been in for over a decade.
Yes,
and I know I'm aware of the discussion we had regarding the 1 mile and 2 mile radius around schools, but these requests are nowhere near schools. So that's certainly a need that needs to be addressed and prioritized as far as I'm concerned.
And I think the answer is yes, we could look at rebalancing some things.
Okay, thank you.
I have a lot to say here, and I'm not sure where to begin, but I feel like a need kind of to do that, since being one of the longest standing commissioners here. And I'll say this. So when this 800, I don't almost know where to begin with some of this, but by the way, to Commissioner Hagan's point, I actually was speaking with Mr. Lyons about just that asset preservation and sidewalks and this morning, because I had understood that $25 million a year had been spent on repaving, resurfacing, for instance, every year. And, he just brought up to me I asked him for the last decade of schedule on resurfacing, and I think some years were as low as 5, and more recently we got up. And I said, what was a reasonable to just do what we needed to do? And he said 30 million a year for, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but 30 million a year for just keeping at pace. But really, because we've run so far behind, that we could use $35 million a year for the next 6 years or so, and then go back down to 30 million, and that would just keep pace. Now, we've had years in the last decade where we've had 5 million, so that kind of gives you a sense. But to me, your key things that you would be focusing or that should be a first priority would be resurfacing, asset preservation. And I went through this with Mr. Lyons just hours ago. Bridge repair and replacement, sidewalk repairs, and that was a recommendation of 3 million currently to 7 million a year. And this isn't, I don't believe, was that new sidewalks? Did that include new sidewalks, Mr. Lyons?
No, ma'am, that's just repair.
Right, that's what I thought. Okay. And then as well, some intersection, we have obsolete infrastructure, structural poles that the lights are on and things like that, that need replacement as well. And we were talking about, I think you just gave me these rough estimates of 2 million a year. So I would just like to say, first off, that for me, asset preservation, to have our resources to look at our budget, so that that is the first thing we have. And I appreciate Ms. Wise' point, because I heard the same thing, that we can't bond it out. But the fact, because I guess the typical resurfacing is about 17 years from what I've heard. And that or that the need is, so if we could rebond some of that resurfacing, it just seems like it'd be very important. And as I understand, it also preserves the roads in the long run. And some of our roads have gotten in really terrible condition. So I would just like to say that I know this is kind of outside this conversation a bit, but asset preservation for me as being a high priority and emphasis. So if I go now to the, I just like to say that I was on the board of March 2017 when this $812 million package was passed. I had been on the board for about 3 months, and I was the one no vote. And at the time I looked at the budget and I said, this is ridiculous. There's not the resources here to ever do this. This is not a realistic projection in any way. And it's misleading to say that we would have these resources in any way. And this is also, I may remind you, when we thought there was going to be a homestead exemption added on the ballot, that we would lose all kinds of greater dollars that never passed. Thank God. Thank you to our taxpayers who realized it wasn't a wise thing. But at any rate, I never saw that we had anywhere near these projections, and I didn't like putting that out to the public in that way, but that's how it was put out. And I appreciate Ms. Wise, the transparency with this. And I think we need to do this, and let our county, unincorporated county taxpayers, residents understand kind of the true state of our budget and our ability to do what we do and what we need to do to make that happen. And I realize that you have been given this task as the current county administrator in the years that as it stepped up, that it was inevitably going to crash. COVID or no COVID, homestead exemption or no homestead exemption, obviously, and that we couldn't maintain this. So I do think we need this discussion, and I appreciate it. And I think it's really important, especially for the new commissioners. The other thing in 4.5 years is we've never reviewed what our priorities would be as a board, and with many new board members, I think that is really critical that we come back and look at that. I looked at the 139 million or 109 million bond issue. I asked for the specific projects for this year. And I think Mr. Lyons spoke to that now. It wasn't originally in the slide. And 82 million of that, as he said, was at Apollo Beach, already under construction or imminently about to be. And of course, we're not going to touch that. I think the other part of it was ending the Citrus Park extension, of which we have recently spent $50 million on putting a new road up in Carrollwood. Part of it is for the 131st Street in the USF area neighborhood. So I think it's important for people to understand these big pieces of infrastructure that are the big projects out of this. But those are, mostly to what this the 109 million bonding, which I guess is 30 years at $10 million a year, and with a lot of impacts on our budget there. And I just like to just bring up some other thoughts I've had about this. One is, Ms. Wise, I know we have the highest bond ratings in the nation, like higher, I mean, to the peak of, only a handful of communities have them in the entire country out of thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And we have, reserve funds are really, I know, very strong to have it at 20%. That gets you the highest possible bond ratings. But I understand we have our reserves at even a higher point than that. Is that accurate? Like an unincorporated, what is our reserve percentage? And if you could speak to that.
I'm actually going to have Kevin answer that as far as the reserve levels.
I'm sorry, I forget about you not being the budget person too.
Yeah, that's okay. During the budget process,
I'm used to asking you this.
No, we do break up the reserves and we show the balances both on for the unincorporated and for the countywide. And yes, the rating agencies look at overall. And the reason that that rating is so important, it is what drives the interest in which we borrow. And the one good thing is that interest rates are very, very low at this time. So it is a good time to borrow in the municipal market because rates are so low. And because of our outstanding bond rating, those rates are at the very lowest possible. But I will let Kevin answer the question as far as which levels for our unincorporated area fund.
Our unincorporated area fund is at about 18%. The countywide fund is at about 23%. Overall, we're about 21%.
Okay, so I did not understand that we were doing all these reserves in the countywide budget, but not in the unincorporated budget, and kind of keeping the reserves up in the countywide where, I'd like to see more possible spending opportunities there. But, and I think each point that we have, how many millions of dollars in the countywide is each point worth?
I'd have to look at that. I can look at that and I'll let you know.
Okay, because I think I'll let you look at that and not go from my memories, but I'm surprised I didn't quite remember or understand that it was 18% reserves and unincorporated. Okay, that's interesting. The other possibility on here is our mobility fees, which aren't included in here. And I like to make this because I want to make a point, especially with our new commissioners. Our mobility fees are not a source to pay our past sins, of which we have many decades full of not really charging any substantial mobility fees at all. And that's part of the reason we find ourselves in this situation that we're in now. But I just like to make the point that our mobility fees are not included in there. And I really, for us to be doing, I believe that our study that we had done very far underestimated. And I think Commissioner Overman and Smith and I worked very hard to get that study to be a more accurate study. It was just a very, very poorly done study that was just done last year, and very underestimated our mobility fees here in Hillsborough County. But when we are only doing 80% we're really digging our hole deeper into this problem that we're being presented here today. So I would really, especially plead with the new commissioners and like them to understand that keeping our mobility fees at 80% rather than 100% is digging our hole deeper for the future in this regard and what we're seeing now. And the other that I would like new commissioners to know and understand, and I know the county administrator is going to be working on this, I believe, in the future. You know that I've been talking about this for many years. We used to just combine our unincorporated and our countywide budget when we brought it forward, and it was impossible for any commissioner to be educated about what we were spending our resources on or how we were using our budget. And they're two very different budgets. And the budget we're dealing with and looking at today is simply, and you can confirm this or county administrator, Ms. Wise, is simply the budget of unincorporated Hillsborough County, which I call the city of unincorporated Hillsborough County, which is one of the largest unincorporated areas in the nation. And we're getting close to like 1 million people, but we're talking about city services, more or less, what you typically think of in the unincorporated. And this is strictly the unincorporated budget that we're looking at today. Can you just speak to that for a minute?
Yes, we are speaking today about the unincorporated area fund. I don't think, John and Kevin, that there were any projects that you were referring to in anything we have today that is in countywide. Is that correct?
There potentially could be some county roads within the cities that may get some resurfacing, but I would have to ask my staff for that information.
Right.
Very minimal, if anything.
Right. And I wanted to clarify that because the other thing is that I heard so much, and I'm going to go on after this for a little bit, but I heard so much at the ferry workshop with regards to waiting for this, to understand this. But I would like, especially the new commissioners, and if any of the other commissioners don't understand this, that the design work for the ferry comes out of our countywide budget, not out of this. It doesn't compete with any of this. It never should be paid for with any of this. It comes out of our countywide dollars that are much more flush, much more able to do it. And I will let you know that in other counties, including Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Osceola, Orange, Lee, Collier, their entire transit budget comes out of their countywide dollars to the point of hundreds of millions of dollars. So I just want to make that clear that the ferry is nothing to do with this budget that we're looking at today and these dire needs and this desperate or very serious state that we're in and continue to be in with our unincorporated budget. I just wanted to clarify that, especially for our newer commissioners. And then with regards to the, taxes, the countywide tax or the countywide gas tax and the utility tax in particular, if we go back to the tax chart, maybe we could do that. Because this would be the more resources. Are we putting that up? So these are our potential options here. So the countywide gas tax, there are something like 27 counties of the larger counties that have levied this, or smaller counties, and the surrounding counties around us have levied it as well. I'm pretty sure, to my memory, Polk, Pasco, and Manatee, not Pinellas, but Pinellas doesn't have the issues that we have. But the other counties have levied it. It takes, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the board can do this. It doesn't go on the ballot or anything like this. And we could do it now. It has to be done before October if it was going to be put into effect this year. Is that, would anybody like to answer that?
Commissioner, that is correct. This second local option fuel tax is adopted by a majority vote +1, and it would need to be adopted before October 1 to be effective the following January 1.
And just, I would like to say too, contrary to our information, and not that I would necessarily recommend the whole 5 cents, but this has to be spent on capacity under the law. And in Broward County, for instance, and I believe I'm correct in this, all 5 cents of the countywide gas tax goes to transit. Just like to be clear, the same thing happens in several other counties, but you can just do a 1 cent of it to transit or something else. And that again is a countywide levy as well for the cities. And so there could be maybe an interlocal agreement with the cities to do 1% of that to transit as well. And if we go to the sales tax option, the sales tax option is what we have sitting before the Supreme Court at this point, correct?
Correct. The current local option transportation and sales surtax is before the Supreme Court.
Right. So I know we wanted to put it on the ballot again for this past year. We only had 3 votes, Commissioner Overman, Commissioner Smith, and myself to do that. And depending on what happens with that, it's, possibly the next time to do that would be in 2022, correct?
The local option sales tax is adopted by referendum and would be effective the following January 1st. So if it were in a referendum in 2022, it could be effective January 1 of 2023.
Yeah, and we might see too what happens, obviously, with the Supreme Court. Who knows? Maybe they won't have decided by then. So we may not even know before. That doesn't preclude us from doing that. I'm just it's dark humor. I'm sorry, but we've waited a long time. The utility tax, again, the 10%, and I had read about counties all over the state that had this utility tax. The utility tax wouldn't necessarily have to be spent on transportation by any means, I'm certain. And I think I remembered something. Did you say how much we raised? You said how much, I guess, Osceola or Orange raised something like $80 million, which is pretty substantial on their utility tax. But I know some places you could divide it up. You could spend part of it on affordable housing, part of it on transportation, part of it on other things. Is that a correct characterization?
The utility tax would be considered a general revenue for the unincorporated area. So it is very flexible, that revenue.
Okay. So we could allocate it however, and that again is just 4 votes on our board of directors or the county commission without any other.
That would be adopted by ordinance. The process to adopt an ordinance.
Okay. And then, of course, we know how the ad valorem gets levied, and this CIT goes to, or the budget, the CIT, and we wouldn't be adding to that until after 2026 if we pass that, correct?
Correct. The current CIT expires November 30th, 2026, and to extend it would require a referendum.
Right. And we wouldn't be doing that until such time, not that we would, but until such time as this expires.
I think that the timing would be up to the board.
Okay, but you could
within statutes.
I wondered if it was limited by statute that you could be collecting it now and then also do it again.
The community investment tax and the indigent care surtax, between the two of them, are limited to 1%. We have the indigent care surtax at 0.5%. We have the community investment tax at 0.5%. So they're currently at their maximum combined. An extension would be effective after the expiration of the current tax.
Okay, yes, thanks. And most of the current tax has been spoken for, particularly in the low, these COVID time. We've kind of had a reduction in our income from that, correct?
Yes, the CIT has been programmed out over the many years, and the future capacity of the CIT that has not been previously programmed out has been greatly limited by the negative impacts of COVID and the decline in sales tax.
Thanks. And I would finally just ask the county administrator that when we look in terms of budget reprioritization, and Commissioner Hagan and I spoke a little to that in terms of asset preservation, sidewalks or trails, but and I know what you weren't asking for is more projects to add to it rather than fewer, but I think it's time for us to probably look again of the projects in outgoing years that were supposed to be put on this. We still don't know about the AFT projects, which I guess are the sales tax pending before the Supreme Court, are still outstanding and not part of this list, from what I understand, correct?
The projects that have been identified in relation to the infrastructure, in relation to the transportation surtax, are not part of the CIP at this time.
So I think to match those two things to projects and priorities, that there should be a time when this current board, as changed as it is, relooks at that, matching our making our priorities, reflected in this, and probably maybe setting aside some of the things that are in there. I'm not sure, but I think that needs to be a discussion that this board needs to have and relook at. But I've kind of exhausted most of what I wanted to say, and at this point, I'll call on Commissioner Overman. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your comments. Please stay on this page. Don't take the slide down. And thank you very, very much for the presentation. And I did have one question of clarity that I needed to check. You made mention of the gas tax and how it was utilized. So when it's capacity, I was concerned about whether or not that means new roads versus resurfacing. I'm assuming it does not include resurfacing. But I also had a question regarding the CIT for Kevin. Currently, those funds do expire in 2026, and our schedule that we're looking at for the 12th plan is out to 2026. But I wasn't sure whether or not those funds were bondable. I know they're spoken for through 2026, but if we were to extend the CIT prior to that time period, is that a revenue stream that we could bond in the future?
An extended CIT? Yes, the current CIT was largely bonded, and an extended CIT could be bonded as well. Now, the timing of when that could happen, I think we would need to look into. Is your question, can it be bonded prior to its effective date?
Well, if we were to accelerate the extension, in other words, if we decided, say, this year, next year, or whatever, that we wanted to permanently extend the CIT, then we could possibly refinance at a lower interest rate the existing bonds, and then reschedule or restart or stop the funding for other projects that might add to the funding capacity of those dollars, given that they would be, for perpetuity. Is that Is that anywhere near on target? I mean,
You want me to jump in, Kevin?
I was going to say, I think Ms. Wise might be, now I know that the CIT, the extension would be limited to 30 years, but
Okay.
thank you, Ms. Wise.
Certainly, I think on the right track, Commissioner Overman. Certainly, we would want to confirm with Sam Hamilton and the County Attorney's Office and Bond Counsel. But my understanding is yes, and the CIT is a sound revenue source. And so, yes, a good bondable revenue stream. I think we could do that.
Thank you very much for that answer. And here's where I'm going. It has become abundantly clear for the 2 years I've been sitting here and the many years I've been listening about this 812 plan. And then observing what we've been able to accomplish, plan for, and actually be able to do in the area of transportation planning, that we clearly need a strategic, sustainable investment plan for transportation. Because of these 6 revenue sources, which actually reprioritization is really not a revenue source, it's just moving cookies from one jar to another, technically. But the 5 sources here, the only one that actually is a consistent, long-standing, relatively stable revenue source is the ad valorem. And it tends to be less regressive in difficult economies. So we are anticipating, as a consequence of COVID, at least another year or so, if not longer, of very challenging economic circumstances for our citizens and our small business owners. It doesn't mean that with help and real smart planning that we can't help our citizens and our and our small businesses, as well as local businesses that help in the area of developing transportation projects and working on transportation projects and creating the jobs that transportation projects create. But I think it's critical that we do our best to take a look at every single option out there. And while we have done a great job of partnering for grants and other resources to some degree at the state level when it comes for finding funds, we've also heard in previous preparation for this year's legislative platform and yet legislative budgets that the state is in pretty much the same boat that we're in. And since all of us are having difficulty staying somewhat over water, it's going to be hard pressed to see if the state could really be, FDOT per se, really be of great resource when it comes to those projects and grants that require their participation or funding dollars. So we've already heard at the MPO presentation last that while we've seen a lower gas tax revenue, we have seen an increase in the dock stamp revenue that's been coming through that adds to their SIS dollars. So there's possible that if any of that flows through to the county, that might be a greater dollar amount. But bottom line, all of these taxes that we have that are usury related taxes are regressive to our citizens and add costs to those that may be struggling just to, pay their rent, much less their electric, gas, and water bill. And seeing how much we're actually spending supporting those individuals that need those utilities paid, at least in the last year, it's kind of hard to say, hi, let's just add more on that and call it sustainable. So I do think it's important for us to really look at the income stream or the revenue stream to develop a sustainable investment plan. But I think it's also critically important for us to make sure that we are looking at every pot out there. Where's the pot of money? And historically, in the last, say, several years, I could say, partnering up with the state has been beneficial, although still limited. But partnering up with the feds has been enormously limited because there's been absolutely no infrastructure focus at the federal level that we've had to really get there and really find where we can partner with the feds for funding. And while they are very difficult to obtain, There has been a change in administration. There has been an emphasis on infrastructure investment. We have a change potentially, hasn't been confirmed yet, but does appear to be confirmed. A Secretary of Transportation that has priorities in line with the things that we've been discussing for at least the last 2 years when it comes to, safe streets, Vision Zero, looking for ways to mitigate and create efficiencies in getting traffic through. Basically everything that's on our list that was identified in our surtax that we're still waiting on, has been listed as a priority at the federal level when they're talking about infrastructure investments. So while it isn't necessarily a sustainable portion of the plan, it's strategic in nature. So given that we're looking for funding for 2022 and talking about the shortfalls we have now, it's going to be critically important that we have identified those projects from 2022 through 2026 right now to be able to get them in the federal appropriation schedule, utilizing our federal representatives to assist us in getting the dollars that Hillsborough County needs to remain competitive. Because these are the things that are actually causing us to be somewhat challenging when attracting businesses and taking care of our residents. So I do think it's critically important that we have a further conversation about timing of what projects do oftentimes qualify for federal partnership, but we just haven't gone there because we've been able to get it from the state, or we've taken the decision because that bucket has been empty and might not be going forward, that we've had to take on generating the revenue for all of our transportation efforts. But again, I want to take a look at, these are our income sources. These are our revenue sources. And in a challenging economy, as well as the technology changes that are occurring when it comes to the way people are getting around and a shift to electric cars, that gas tax is going to go away even if we raise it. Not completely, not immediately, but it'll decline as people move to other technologies for being able to get around. So I do think it's important that we develop a strategic plan and look for ways that we can actually, adjust our financing mechanisms, but more importantly, ways that we can get some help. If we aren't going to raise our ad valorem, which is the only steady revenue stream here, that generates actually the most amount of money, with the exception of the sales tax, which we're sitting on hold and we can't use to resurface roads. That sales tax, that 1 cent, is the only thing that generated the $88 million that Kevin made mention of earlier. The gas tax would only generate us $17 million. A mill would generate us $68 million we could actually count on every year that we are not doing anything with. So I think it's critically important that we realistically look at what we're trying to do. And the last piece that I'll mention, I'm getting wind from our local delegation that there is bill writing going into place right now that would put a cap, an arbitrary cap, on impact and/or mobility fees effective July 1. So while we have a phase in on potential tax that we are charging because we were concerned about the economy last year, we got a bigger problem this year. But and we have set a schedule to revisit that situation that Commissioner Smith attempted to bring up earlier. But if we wait until June to do it, our state legislative may have actually kept us from being able to go any further than, if we're at 80% now to 82%. And that's going to be really difficult for us to deal with too. So I recognize that we have to look at our revenues, but when our income does not match or at least exceed our upkeep, you know, our lack of planning is going to be our downfall. And as it was something I was always teaching when I was teaching financial planning to my customers or clients over the years. So that focus in developing a sustainable investment plan for transportation, I think, is absolutely necessary. And using the state and the federal, which has not been our focus in the past, as an avenue, since there does seem to be a commitment for investing in infrastructure in this country. And we want to be there with our hand out and a shovel-ready projects ready to go and give our delegation the ability to help advocate for us. And I'll stop there.
And thank you. And Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you. This is a really good first step, and I appreciate the administration and our financial and transportation departments bringing this eye-opening, fact-filled information to us as a start. It's absolutely necessary.
Excuse me, somebody has their mic on?
Oh.
If everybody could mute. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Smith.
So just thanking everybody. The $812 million plan was really it was theoretically a 10-year plan. This is an $831 million plan, and it's supposed to be our 5-year plan of CIP. And of course, we've seen we're very, very far from being able to fund that. If we couldn't, and we couldn't fund the $812 million over 10 years. So of course we can't fund 800, and that was 10 good years, some of the best financial years this county saw, and still couldn't work up the payments on that for 10 years. So naturally we can't afford to fund this $835 million worth of 5 years of CIP projects over the next 5 years. So we definitely need, as the other commissioners have said, to reprioritize and figure out what we can do in the next 5 years and in the next 10 years. And it needs to be done in a context of a comprehensive look at where people are and where they need to go, because that has changed quite a bit since even when the list for the 812 project was drawn up, because a whole lot of growth has come into South County that is clogging the roads there. And also because we have, as the direction of the community has changed, the direction of the board has changed election by election as the voters are speaking, and they've elected commissioners who have drawn up new priorities of safe routes to school, and Vision Zero, and multimodal transportation options. And so I do think we need given the limited funds, we need a fresh, realistic look at what we want to do soon, short-term, midterm, long-term, in the context of a plan. This $831 million plan, if we had $830 million, which we don't, it's a start, but it's not everything we need in transportation. And I think we need to open our eyes there too. This $831 million is the 5 years that we can't even afford. We are actually several $1 billion behind in transportation needs. I haven't heard that number exactly recently. I remember when Commissioner Sharp and Higginbotham were talking about the initial transit tax, the number was $14 billion. And when I asked Mike Merrill about it just a few years ago, it was $9 billion was the number he gave me. So I don't know if we have that number. It's out of reach in any case. But the point is, it's billions that we have fallen behind. And so it's clear that we can't borrow or spend our way out of it. We're in a deep hole. And while we're trying to get out of the hole, we have to stop digging. Our citizens expect us to plan and manage growth in a way that provides infrastructure at the same time that we're permitting development that puts more cars on the road. Everybody expects it. Seems like common sense, doesn't it? But what we've clearly, I mean, it's not pointing fingers to say we've got to change what has been being done, because what has been done got us in this very deep hole. So we have to stop making the same mistakes that got us here, and start doing things differently. And everybody has to help. The problem we're facing took years, many years, to dig us into this hole, with the help of everyone who participates in reviewing development and its impacts. As another commissioner once pointed out, he's no longer here. I'm not talking about anybody here, but he pointed out that when citizens were complaining about development overwhelming our infrastructure, our roads and schools, he said, look, the county commission hardly ever approves anything that was not already approved by our planners and our planning commission. And, you know, I couldn't disagree. We all have a role to play, and we all have to ask ourselves how we can work together. Development services, transportation planners, planning commission, all has to put on fresh glasses to figure out how we can stop doing what got us in such a deep hole with transportation and other infrastructure, and how we can change so that when new development is proposed, we look at this differently. We have to stop putting more traffic in areas where the roads are substandard, and allowing design exceptions that allow those roads to remain substandard and without the complete streets infrastructure we've all signed on to, unless we have some kind of a plan for providing that infrastructure, safe infrastructure. We have to, as I know some of us commissioners have, insist that as development occurs, it connects the grid of streets within that development to the outer streets in a grid that would help, help alleviate traffic congestion and give traffic extra room to flow around the clogged roads that we are far from being able to widen and expand. And in some cases, there just isn't even right way to do so. We have to come up with other pieces of the puzzle besides money. We have to find the money. We have to prioritize our projects, but at the same time, we have to start providing the other pieces of the puzzle, insisting that that developers connect the grid to provide extra capacity for traffic to flow around the clogged roads. And possibly we can insist that when dead end roads are within a new subdivision, so they don't connect the grid and they function essentially as private roads, we can change our land development code. In fact, it was recommended at one point years ago to make such roads ineligible for county maintenance, take them off our very stressed taxpayer funding dollars, and let the homeowners association take care of those roads if they want to make them remain private. So that
before you go, can we ask Mr. Lyons to take the chart down? Thanks. Sorry.
So that our public dollars would then could be used more efficiently and effectively for maintaining public roads, and wouldn't get further stressed out by trying to maintain private roads that are no good to most of the public, and while they're all sitting in traffic outside these subdivisions. So certainly in considering proposals that add density outside the urban service area on substandard rural roads, we should get some help from our county staff and administration in reviewing that new development and informing us and being honest, given an honest appraisal that if we approve that extra density out there, we are adding to our traffic problem. Unless there's something connected with it in terms of development paying its way. We should, all of us working together, need to stop recommending development that we cannot accommodate on our roads, and we cannot afford to accommodate anytime in the near future. And so I would just ask us all to put our heads together looking at this and not look at this as something that just the commissioners have to figure out, but it's something all of us working together have to figure out, all the pieces that might be brought, new ideas that might be brought to help stop us making this problem worse while we're trying to figure out how to afford to make it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. And I'll recognize Commissioner Myers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate all the comments that have been said today. It is truly an educational experience for me regarding our budget. So I just have a couple of questions. One could, in this regard, and I know we have a countywide budget and then we have the unincorporated budget. So my question is, could any of our countywide funds be transferred to the unincorporated budget?
Commissioner, no, the countywide funds under state law and court cases is for the countywide purposes. Unincorporated funds are for unincorporated purposes.
Oh, then we just gonna need to talk with our lobby, see how we can get that changed in some kind of way, because we're just missing out on so much. Okay, thank you. My second question is, well, not really a question, but I know public safety should be our #1 priority. And listening to the presentation, we do not have funding for fire in the law enforcement. So that should be the top priority as we are talking about transportation and CIP. And my last thing I'd like to share, and I do agree with everyone who has already said that we would like to see the priority list reestablished, and maybe in a 3 to 5 year window. I mean, we have a whole holistic list of projects, and I'm sure for the commissioners who've already been on some years, your project is #1. I get that, okay? But we have projects also that are on here too. And I'd just like to see us, if we can just reestablish the list. All of them are priority, but based on funding. Okay, based on funding and what we could fund and what we cannot fund. And those are my questions. That's all I have.
Thank you. I didn't know if there was, I think you, did you want to respond to that, Ms. Wise, or?
I think that, we've been hearing from several of you that, safety projects, road resurfacing, maintaining our assets is of the most importance. And we would concur with that. And we have fallen behind. And so we do need to look at those projects. And I think a fresh look at the projects are warranted. We do have projects, as Mr. Lyons mentioned, that are underway, that we have money from either the federal government or the state, that we need to capitalize on those other opportunities and move those forward. And then two, and we concur, is that there's going to probably be some other dollars that are going to be coming forward. And we do need to have some projects that are shovel ready, per se, that we could move quickly on should those funding sources become available. So we hear you, we understand very much. And like I said, you know, I don't want to be the rainer of parades, but this conversation needed to be had and we needed to talk about it candidly.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hagan, you're recognized again.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. And I had to step away for a moment, so I apologize if I repeat anything that was already stated. Back when I heard Commissioner Smith reference the uncertainty with the unfunded need amount, I can tell you when I chaired the Transportation Task Force, the number was always somewhere between $8 and $10 billion in unfunded needs that did not include rail. And that was the number that we frequently used. With an unfunded need that great, the only way to adequately address the problem is to have an identifiable, dedicated funding source. Anything less, including the original $800 million plan, is simply kicking the can down the road. I support, again, I heard Commissioner Smith say, prioritizing our needs in a 5 and 10 year fashion. We need to have a serious discussion, not today, but on the plan of the various potential funding options. Now, should the sales tax that the Supreme Court is still holding on to, if that remains, then certainly that's our funding source. If it's not, are we placing it back on the ballot in 22? And that money would be available, I guess, in January of 23. Are we going to consider the gas tax? The other option that was listed, the CIT tax, I want to point out to the board that years ago, when it was obvious that we were reaching capacity with the CIT, there was a fair amount of discussion about pursuing extending the CIT early. You don't have to wait until 26 or 27 or 28 to do that. That can be extended early. I guess the issue was at the time was that you would reduce bonding capacity by extending it early. So I think one thing that we might want to consider or look into is if that was placed back on the ballot in, let's say, 24, how would that impact our bonding capability in January of 25? And I only point that out because, again, if we're talking about 5 and 10 year plans, that might be something that we want to look into, that we do not necessarily have to wait until 28 to have it back on the ballot, or 26. It could potentially be done earlier. So I just wanted to point that out. And I think it's been a very productive discussion, and I look forward to continuing it. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the record, I just like to, yes?
I was trying to get your attention. I was wondering.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see any hands up there.
I'm on the phone. I'm on the phone. So.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I'm sorry. I appreciate you're recognized,
right.
Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you. Thanks. I don't want to rehash a lot of what's been said, but I do want to just highlight that obviously what Commissioner Hagan just said is important, and I think that Commissioner Overman's point that Bonnie Wise reiterated about having shovel-ready projects in case there's federal dollars that become available, I think that's very important as well. I wanted to just say, though, I really think I'm looking here at page 12, the list of the potential revenue sources and options. There are 6 categories. Well, there's 5 categories here, and then reprioritization is the 6th, and obviously impact fees are another category. I would like very much to see, and this may already exist, and some of the veteran commissioners may already have seen this, but I would very much like to see in 10 similarly situated counties, preferably within the state of Florida, how other counties are using these different taxes compared to the way that Hillsborough is using them. I think it might provide us a window into things that we're wildly out of step with. That's number one. And then number two goes, I think, to the issue of the uncertainty over the sales tax. And obviously, that's a huge issue for us. But another thing that's uncertain is what is actually going to happen to the money that has been collected. And since there's 2 years worth now, and I think the figure that was Hillsborough County share is already something a little bit under $100 million. You know, if the tax were to fail, I'm not sure what arguments are being developed to try to see if we can at least salvage some or all of the money that's already there. And I think that is something, it's enough money that it actually makes sense to try to go after. I never liked the idea of trying to pay recurring expenses with one-time money, and the discussion about going into reserves makes me very skittish. But in this particular case, it is really one-time money, and it's money that was originally supposed to be for transportation to begin with. I'm not trying to get ahead of ourselves, but it is a potentially $88 million hit. So I just wanted to mention that. But I just want to close by saying that I think that while it's very important that we prioritize, I also think it's important that we examine the potential revenue sources, because quite honestly, these numbers are so large that cuts alone and even a small acceleration of the mobility fees alone are not going to get us anywhere near where we need to get, not just for this money number, but also the number we know is out there for our needs in terms of public safety and fire stations and other things that the community needs. I think that we need to have a very, very broad-based discussion and put every single thing on the table. We can always reject different options, but I think every single option needs to be out there.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Cohen, for those remarks. I'd like to bring up the page. I'm just going to do a couple of, respond a little bit. The page that has the uses and sources. And there's a part that says on there, yeah, either one of them, but there's a little part that says grants off to the side, which is, as I understand, that's like the federal and state money part, that little teeny part. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is the grants that are currently programmed in the CIP for transportation.
Which, and I think if we see charts from other places, we'll find about the same. In some ways, I don't expect, in terms of our road building necessarily, our new, and I could be wrong, new federal sources or state sources, you know, are for things like our county roads. I mean, I hear a lot about transit from Mr. Buttigieg, and a lot of times this comes down through DOT and does the DOT kinds of things like at Apollo Beach and whatever. But so I don't expect to see a huge increase, but there could be. But I just wanted to point out how de minimis with the county that these kinds of resources are for the county level roads and kind of local uses. And also, if we could go back to that chart again about the different sales, the different taxes available. So yeah, I think I really appreciate you're going right where I go all the time, Commissioner Cohen, which is, oh my God, show me what other counties are doing. And that's where I discovered all my information about how radically, incredibly underfunded our impact fees were, shockingly, from across the state when I did any comparisons of that. And I pulled them myself, and it never, you know, it was never presented. So I think that is very much something we should understand what they're doing with gas taxes and utility taxes. I don't necessarily agree that the only stable funding source is the ad valorem. I think Commissioner Hagan brought up the sales tax. The sales tax generally brings us the most money, and we don't have the amounts here. The most money of any of the most annual income of any of these sources. But also, it's important to note that a diversity of sources. We've been too heavily dependent on single sources, sometimes the ad valorem property tax, for instance. But like if you look at something like Hart's budget, we have a $500,000 by law, can't raise it without referendum or whatever. And right now it's bringing in 44 million a year. And when I first was there just 4 years ago, it was 36 million a year. Whereas the sales tax revenue would be more like 100, the half cent, 45%, more like 140 million a year, which is, could reasonably start to be reasonable in terms of Hart resources. Not extraordinary, but reasonable. And so I think it's important to see the differences in these as Commissioner Overman pointed out, the countywide gas tax is a smaller source, but we've gone 4 years without getting that smaller source at all, and it will be probably starting to decrease as more and more electric vehicles, but it still is some source of dollars right now, and a possibility, and one that, as I said, other counties all over have passed, and it's simply a commission, requires supermajority, 5 commissioners. And again, I think it would be important to look at, and again, as Commissioner Cohen says, that, some of these taxes can be used for other things as well, like the utility tax, and look at, you could do partially to our transportation, and others could be to our affordable housing program. Someone had once suggested that entire to put the tax on, and you can do it in amounts of up to 10%, to put that tax on and totally dedicated to affordable housing. So there's options within this this list and chart, but I think one of the important things is to have a diversity and not just rely on one thing or ad valorem or whatever. And you'll see that during recessive times, maybe recently there hasn't been this chart shown, but certain things dip more. It may be that the sales tax goes down there and the ad valorem stays, or sometimes the ad valorem is down and the sales tax is, a better source, continuing stability. So it's a mix and diversity, I think, that brings us there, as well as the sales tax in our important way is paid by tourists as well. So that's an important point. It's not just on the totally on the burden of residents of the county, and they're not the only ones that use the infrastructure and resources of the county as well. So I think that that's also important to note in there. But I think it's been I thank the staff for bringing it forward. I think there's ideas about what more to bring forward and how we could, even get more information. And I think there's been lots of good comments collected. And I don't know if you wanted to make some further comments, Ms. Wise.
Thank you. And just, I was looking at the numbers from the transportation surtax, the county share to date that's been collected is just over $188 million. So, well, that's over, number of years. But we thank you for going through this discussion with us today. We know that there's more to come and more analysis to do. We have a few takeaways, and we will follow up and schedule those accordingly with you.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll stand adjourned. I'm sorry, Commissioner Overman, did you want to? I'm sorry.
I think it's too late. That's all right.
Sorry, I just saw that. Sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.